My name is Julia Redeker Flynn, and I am the campaign director of the 1 in 3 campaign at an organization called Advocates for Youth in Washington, D.C. I am privileged to be one of the hosts for this historic event. Today, for the first time ever, we will be hosting a Speakout online over the internet for 8 hours with 100 people talking about their experiences with abortion care. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to the many people who will be joining us later with their personal stories. As many of you know, here in the United States, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in her lifetime. Despite the fact that abortion is very common, we rarely talk openly about our decisions to end a pregnancy. For too long, conversations around abortion have been dominated by politicians and anti-choice activists who use shame and stigma as a tool to silence people and to advance legislation that limits access to abortion services. Today, we are working to build a new conversation, one that is grounded in the lived experiences of real people, one that works towards building community rather than isolation, compassion rather than shame. We are shattering the silence. And today we also honor the long tradition of speakouts that started on the eve of the historic Roe v. Wade decision. We also honor the long tradition of storytelling in social justice movements, the tradition of placing people and their lived experiences at the center of the conversation. Today, we're grateful for the opportunity to host and bring together people from all around the country to break through the stigma and shame people are made to feel around abortion and to highlight real people's experiences and stories with abortion care. Some amazing folks are participating today. Among them, I want to mention Lizz Winstead, co-creator of The Daily Show and co-founder of Lady Parts Justice, Congressman Mike Quigley, Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, the executive director of the Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, Cecile Richards, the president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund, artist and activist Heather Alt and Fabiana Rodriguez, student activists from colleges and universities around the nation, and so many more. And we have to say it's an honor to welcome Dr. Parrott as well as one of our co-hosts to this Speakout.
Thank you so much, Julia. What an honor it is to be here and to participate in such a historic event.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask you one question about, why did you decide to come today? Why are you participating in the 1 in 3 Speakout?
The 1 in 3 campaign really is so important because it reminds us that abortion is an issue that touches everybody's life. So when we think about that statistic, 1 in 3 women having an abortion in their lifetime, it really means to me that this isn't just someone we know. These women are everywhere. They're friends, they're family, they're people we know and people we love. So an opportunity to be here for women to tell their stories and to honor their experiences is something that's so important.
Thank you. And I'm thrilled to introduce our very first guest. She's the co-creator of The Daily Show and co-founder of Air America Radio. She is a hilarious and fearless comedian, and in 2012, she co-founded an organization called Lady Parts Justice. Liz, can you tell us a little bit about Lady Parts Justice? Okay, we're having one difficulty, so we're going to keep talking with Dr. Parrott here as we're waiting. So what does it mean to you personally to be able to help women who come to you seeking an abortion?
Listen, we all have strong feelings when it comes to pregnancy and abortion, but the most important thing to understand is that every woman is different, every experience is different. And so, as a physician, it's not my job to judge women or condemn them or shame them, but really to help them find the path that's best for them and for their families. The stigma and the shame that are surrounding abortion and that patients that I take care of every day live with is something that can be an immense burden to carry. Imagine if you were going to your doctor's office to be assaulted by a gauntlet of protesters when you were just trying to go to your appointment. It's really hard not to internalize that stigma, internalize that shame. So being in a situation like this where we can invite women to talk about their lives, about their experience, and to say, you know, this is something that is common. This is a decision that I made, and I'm confident in it, and it's something that was best for me at the time. I think is a really powerful message to send.
Thank you. And I think we are now ready to hear from Lizz Winstead. And again, she is a comedian and fearless leader of Lady Parts Justice. And I believe she's with us right now.
I am. Hi.
Hi, Liz. How are you?
Hey, this is great. I'm great. Thanks.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about Lady Parts Justice?
Sure. It's an organization that is trying to reinvent the conversation around reproductive justice. What that means. We have seen that in our travel and in our sort of organization, we've realized that there is a lot of women who really do not understand what is happening as far as legislation, access in the United States. They don't understand at all. And so we wanted to, through using humor and outrage, sort of get people to focus on what's happening in their communities and empower them by bringing activists and creatives together locally to listen to each other's needs, because when we talk about reproductive access and we talk about reproductive health, there's very many lenses that people look at that through, whether it's women of color, whether it's, you know, white cis women, trans women. And so what we want to do is bring people together from the activist side and the creative cultural arts side and have them listen to each other, so that when it comes to working, removing shame, stigma, and looking at who the politicians and who the activists are in the anti-abortion community who are working to sort of dismantle reproductive rights, that we can be the foot soldier or the pack mule, if you will, for a creative, smart idea that women of color might have in their community, that we can stuff envelopes, we can help them, you know, put chairs together, whatever it is they need, but to make sure that the voices and the faces of each community are representing and have support from all of the other people who are living in the space.
Great, thank you. And what made you decide to start sharing your story?
I decided to share my story when I realized that, as I just shared my story with friends, they would, when I was finished, they said, I've been through that too. And we talked a lot about feeling relief from being able to access abortion care and the guilt and the shame that was sort of heaped upon feeling relief, feeling that we felt guilty about knowing what was best for us and the choices that were made for us, because the narrative was never a positive one surrounding the issue. And I found that when I told my story and I would relate my story with girlfriends, that we all felt that same way. So I decided that, you know what, since I'm an outspoken person anyway and I get called every name in the book, I might as well just get out there and be outspoken about something that I think is powerful. And when I share my story, it is the relationship that I had with my friends in telling the story just grew 20-fold, where I would get Facebook messages from college students, women in the audience, saying, I've been through that too. And I would get a couple of responses. One is, you know, I think I might need to start telling my story too, because I think that it really makes a difference to normalize abortion. Because 1 in 3 women have it, we never want to be in a position where a medical procedure that 1 in 3 people need is somehow scrutinized, is somehow made to feel like it's something other than it is. We need to reintroduce the science aspect instead of the I feel aspect into the conversation. You know, just as a side note, I thought it was so interesting when the nurse who didn't have Ebola said, you know what, I'm not going to live with your quarantine. I'm going to ride my bike. I don't have Ebola. I would like people to actually listen to the doctors and the scientists around this issue, and I'm going to live my life accordingly. And I thought that was a really strong message, and one that we could apply to this issue too, where when people start adding and lobbying on things that have nothing to do with the medical science or the procedure itself into the conversation, we shouldn't be allowing those things to drive the narrative. I think that the women's stories and the medical part of it should be driving the narrative on this issue.
Thanks, Liz. And so today you're sharing with us a video. Can you tell us a little bit about the video?
Sure. Well, I travel around the country doing stand-up and doing benefits for reproductive justice organizations or reproductive health organizations, and I tell my story a lot. And I happen to have been asked. I was honored to be asked to tell a story at an event that was honoring the fabulous writer Judy Blume, and so for a First Amendment benefit. And so I thought, it's a really lovely videotape, and to be at that event where people were actually celebrating the First Amendment, what it means to tell your story, and then I thought it's a really good way to condense it down to a place where I feel like, as a young woman who my story, the thing I say often about my abortion story is that it's not a unique story. It happens to a lot of young women who are sexually active at a very young age, inexperienced, and make decisions for themselves, and because of the shame and stigma, are afraid to consult people, so they make decisions for themselves. Sometimes those aren't the greatest decisions.
Great, thank you. So we're excited to see it. So I guess let's go ahead and roll Lizz Winstead's video.
These women have terrific tales to tell. Co-creator of The Daily Show, Lizz Winstead, and once again, author Elna Baker.
Hi. I got pregnant the first time I ever had sex. December 13th, 1978. Call it luck of the draw. Actually, call it luck of the withdraw, because really that's what we're talking about here. I mean, I was 16. I had it all figured out. I could not get pregnant. I was popular. I have pom-poms in my room. I mean, it was only the burnout girls that got pregnant. The ones with the feathered hair and the skinny jeans and the boyfriends who swam in their long pants. My boyfriend was a hockey player. Plus, I was Catholic. And if I used birth control and had sex, I'd be committing 2 sins. I chose the more fun sin. So when I missed my period, I thought it was due to the stress from the many activities popular girls do. I thought it was God smiling upon me, saying, I'm going to give you a respite this month from the bloodbath, because you, honey, are just too busy being popular. But then the second month rolled around, and again, no period, and I began to think, wow, I should go find out that I am not pregnant. But I didn't know where to go. The burnout girls knew where that was, but I wasn't going to ask them. What if someone saw me talking to them with feathered hair and all? But I did go to the one place I knew I'd get the correct answer, my devoted hockey player boyfriend. What the fuck? Were you on something? Well, I was on you. I thought gravity would prevent this. Well, you dumb bitch, you're on your own here. Not the answer I'd hoped for. So as I rode home on the bus from my now ex-boyfriend's house, I realized I was really in a pickle. Until I looked up, and there, on the bus, before me, between the We Treat Feet ads and the continuing education banner, there it was, the Southside Life Care Health Center. Choices, options. Free. And it was only 6 blocks away from my house. So I showed up at the center, and I felt really comforted that it was run by the Lambs of Christ. Bless these Christ-like lambs for wanting to help me. As I walked through the door, a giant easel holding a big laminated poster greeted me. The restroom is the first door on the left. Cups are provided for your urine sample. When you are finished, leave it on the back of the tank. Someone will be out to see you shortly. I peed and I sat down on one of the plaid couches. As I looked around, I noticed there was no medical brochures, no posters of the human body, not even that big plastic heart. I started feeling like I didn't want to be in a rec room anymore. I wanted to be in a doctor's office. And the Lands of Christ artwork was a bit unsettling. The praying hands, you know, those weird bronze hands that are chopped off at the wrist and slapped onto a piece of plywood that sort of say, like to help you, Can't. And the only heart displayed was one covered in thorns, and if you plugged it in, it lit up and throbbed. Then, from behind the door that had the footprints poem taped to it, a doctor in a lab coat emerged carrying a big book. It wasn't until later that I realized anyone who sells Clinique or Lancome could also wear a lab coat, and that she wasn't really a doctor. The doctor sat next to me and said, "We got your test results back, and it's positive." Yay! I shouted, thinking positive for me. Well, good, because you're going to have a baby. Well, that's not positive, that's negative. I thought, yeah, she should have said it's negative, because negative should be positive in this place. I was so confused, and I was just looking at her, and she said, well, the good news is I've got some pictures of your fetus. So she opens up the atlas-sized book she was carrying and says, now, this is the size of your fetus today. And it was a baby. A huge, bloody baby. And before I could even say, like, that's a baby, she turned to the next page and says, and this is the size of your fetus in 6 months. And it was the picture of a 6-year-old kid on a bike. And I'm like, and the bike? Really? So she says, well, you've got a life to think about now. And I said, well, what about my life? What are my choices? She said, well, you've already made your choices. But I'm not ready to have a baby. I'm popular. I have pom-poms in my room. My boyfriend is I can't be a mom. I don't know what to do. Well, we offer lots of options. Oh, I thought, wow, now we are getting somewhere. Well, you can carry the baby to term and keep it, or you can carry the baby to term and give it up for adoption. Lots? Lots? 2 is lots? What about abortion? Abortion? Abortion is against our law. I had no idea it was against our law. I didn't want to break our law. I mean, she's a doctor. She knows about law. God, I just felt sick. I just wanted to go home. And I said, I just need to think. I just need to think. And I got up to leave, and as I walked towards the door, the woman calmly looked at me and said, remember, Liz, it's mommy or murder. I felt so alone. I felt worthless and invisible. Because here before me was a woman who chose to impersonate the 2 types of people teenagers choose most: a person of God and a physician. She defined me. She looked me square in the face and told a 16-year-old girl, your life is insignificant. How could she say she was pro-life when she wasn't pro-my life? That is not pro-life, that is profane.
Great, Liz, and thanks so much for bringing attention to the problems around crisis pregnancy centers. And now I'd like to welcome Julie via Skype, who will share her story. Julie, please start whenever you feel comfortable.
Hi. Today is a really auspicious day in my life because it marks 5 years since my life and the life of my family was inexplicably changed. 5 years ago today, I was at a radiologist's office, excitingly waiting for the results to find out about my pregnancy. I was 20 weeks pregnant with a well-wanted pregnancy. My husband and I were excited to and we learned from the radiologist that we were having another little boy, so our older son would have a little brother. We were told to go to my doctor's office, and as we were driving there, we started thinking about, what are we going to name this one? We got to the doctor's office, went back into her study, and she looked at us and said, we're so sorry. And I looked at her and I said, well, it's a boy. I'll have to have a third then, and I can try for my girl then. And then she looked at me again and said, they didn't tell you. Tell us what? That's when our world shattered. We learned then that the much-wanted son we were carrying didn't have a brain. We were sent on for further testing, which confirmed the initial diagnosis, and even sent on for further testing because I wanted to make sure of what a prognosis looked like, what we were talking about as we weighed all of our options. As we were waiting for our level 3 ultrasound and an MRI, my husband and I decided that depending on what quality of life looked like would really depend what we would do around this pregnancy. If the prognosis was grim, we agreed that we would end the pregnancy prematurely. The prognosis was very grim. We learned that our son didn't have a brain. He would have no quality of life if he even survived to term. And if he did survive birth and the surgery that would have happened soon after, he would have the developmental quality of life of a 2-month-old. Devastated, my husband and I decided to terminate the pregnancy, and did so via labor and delivery because in my state, I was unable to have access to a surgical abortion, given that I was 21 weeks pregnant. I was told to go and get pregnant again and that they would just monitor me, but this was a 1 in a million occurrence. It shouldn't happen again. Well, lightning does strike twice, and 17 weeks into my subsequent pregnancy with a daughter, I learned that she too had the same brain abnormalities. Her brain also wasn't growing and developing. Because of the age of gestation, I was only 18 weeks. I was able to access a surgical abortion with a caring physician. I was very grateful to have a choice. I honor my son and my daughter by speaking out. And because I had to sacrifice for them, I was able to welcome in 2011 a little girl, and in 2013, a little boy to complete my family. I am the face of abortion. I am one of the many faces of abortion. It wasn't an easy decision, but I am so grateful that the choice was mine.
Thank you so much for sharing that story and really helping to shatter the stigma surrounding abortion. I'd like to ask you, why did you feel like it was important to share your story in these circumstances, in this venue, in such a public way?
I've been very public about my story, so this is not the first time that I've chosen to do so in a public venue. But I feel that it honors the life of my son and daughter that was cut prematurely and cut way too soon. I offer another perspective on abortion, that it's not a black or white consideration. And ultimately, it should not be the choice of a politician who has no sense of circumstance, of what my circumstance is. The choice should be left to an individual, her doctor, and her family.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you. It's really difficult to be in that position, and we really appreciate you coming here and speaking today and sharing a story and honoring your children in that way.
Thank you.
So as a healthcare provider, one of the things that I think is so important, Julia, is really that we continue to honor the relationship that patients have with their physicians. Julie talked a little bit about the way that legislators have interfered historically in the lives of their patients and between the physician and patient relationship. And I think it's important to talk about that when we talk about the stigma and shame as well. So we're joined now on Skype by Reverend Deborah Hafner, co-founder and president of the Religious Institute. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Reverend Hafner. We have a couple more minutes before Reverend Hafner will join us.
And I think that story really brings to light some of your relationships with your patients that you see every day. And would you mind telling us a little bit about how the stigma around your work and what type of stigma you face in doing this work every day?
The relationship, as I mentioned, between physicians and patients really is important. The OBGYNs, and one of the reasons why I went into this profession is because the relationship that women have with their doctors is one that cannot be replicated and should not be interfered with, in my opinion. Women talk to their gynecologists about things that they feel like they can't talk to anyone else about. So this connection that we have to our patients and the respect that we have in knowing that women really family are the expert in their own lives. So we need to trust them to make the decisions that are going to be best for them in conjunction with their families and through the advice of their doctors. I think is something that really is important. So as a provider, we think about the way that women come to these decisions. We see that Julie had difficult decisions to make. She wasn't able to access a safe surgical abortion in her state, and ultimately had a labor and delivery of her first child, and then was able to have a surgical abortion for her second one. But the stigma and shame surrounding abortion affects the way that providers, the way that students choose to go into medicine, the fields that they choose. And so we want to keep that in mind. It's not just the patients that are affected who are so important in this. It's also the providers and the way that we are able or unable to provide care for our patients. Great. I think we're ready for Deborah Hafner. Reverend Hafner, again, is the co-founder and president of the Religious Institute. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, Reverend Hafner.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about your work?
So I'm an ordained minister, and for the last 40 years, I have been counseling and supporting women who are facing unplanned pregnancies. The Religious Institute is a network of more than 7,000 religious leaders from across the United States who support sexuality education, reproductive justice, and the full inclusion of women and LGBT people in faith communities, but also in society.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Reverend Hafner.
I'm delighted to be here to make a clear faith-based statement that abortion is always a moral decision, that women need to have the access to abortion, to safe legal abortion, so that they can be the moral agents who support their own decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. How does the faith tradition tie in with ensuring women's access to safe abortion care?
So more than 30 religious organizations and denominations support women's right to make their own decisions about whether an abortion is warranted in their own service, in their own situation. It is only a woman who can be her own moral agent, who can decide what she should do with an unplanned pregnancy. And as we've already heard from just these first few, there are many, many reasons that women face unplanned pregnancies and need abortion services. Faith leaders play an important role. We believe that women need to examine their own consciousness. They need to be in conversation with their partners and their families, as well as with their faith leaders. But ultimately, it is the woman's decision. What's very important, I think, people confuse and think of religious people as being against abortion when millions and millions of people ground their support for safe and legal abortion in their religious belief. And Scripture itself teaches that the health and the life of the mother must always take precedence over the life of the fetus.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Reverend Hafner. I think it's an important point that you make, that women function and abortions happen in the context of women's lives, and a lot of that is faith-based for so many women.
Yeah, I think it's so often that we hear, faith being pitted against reproductive health and rights decisions, but it's really powerful, and many people do speak from their faith-based positions about why whatever decision they make around their pregnancy is a moral decision, and they come to that from a faith-based perspective.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited. We're almost ready for our next guest, so I'm going to ask another follow-up question for you as a provider. If you could change one thing to make abortion more accessible for people coming to you, what would that one thing be?
I think one thing that would really help accessibility of abortion is really to provide support for women across the board. There's this idea that there is a certain kind of woman that has an abortion, and that's why this 1 in 3 campaign is so important, because it really does shatter that stigma, that idea that it's this kind of woman who does this. This isn't my problem, this isn't my family, this isn't anyone that I know. And as a result, so many women come in to see us and they feel isolated and alone in making this decision. And I think that if we are able to speak more openly about abortion, then it allows women, and then also the physicians that are supporting them in the office, to find a way to help them to get through this in a way that's going to be healthy and make sure that as they move forward in their lives, they are supported in many other ways.
Great, thank you.
Julia, I'm so excited about our next guest. Our next guest is Yamani Hernandez, the Executive Director of the Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health, known as ICAH. Welcome, Yamani. Please start when you're ready.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, for joining us. Thank you so much, Yamani.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks. So should I share my story?
Yes, please. Go right ahead.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure.
Whenever you're ready.
So I recorded this story 3 years ago when the 1 in 3 campaign launched, 2011. I had an abortion when I was 19. I was between my sophomore and junior year of college. There was a lot of pressure to succeed. When I came home to tell my mom that I was pregnant, I was met with a lot of skepticism, a lot of threats of abandonment. I actually lost a lot of confidentiality. My whole family, my whole block was kind of brought into my sort of reproductive health decisions, and there was a lot of pressure. The person that I was involved with at that time also was another student, felt a lot of pressure as well. And it seemed like every place that I went to for support, I kind of got the opposite. And it occurred to me that I was going to be doing it on my own if I was going to be carrying that pregnancy to term. And so there was a lot of stigma around being pregnant and around finishing school and whether anyone believed that I could or I would. And so I decided to have an abortion so that I could continue my education and without interruption. In my video, I talked a little bit about how when I went to the medical provider to have the procedure, there was a kind of a pre-counseling procedure that was I was really broken up through it, and I think that it occurred to me, and I talked about this in my video as well, that there should be a lot more support for women and people in general as they are pursuing healthcare and making sometimes hard decisions. And I feel like sometimes the conversation about abortion is just really not nuanced at all. It's very there's a lot of judgment and shame around it, and it's kind of judgment about whether it's a good decision or a bad decision, or you're a good person or a bad person, and less conversation about sort of like the complex reasons why people have abortions and what the experiences can be like, ranging from positive experiences where people feel relieved and happy about their experiences to people who have less happy experiences and even sometimes feel regret.
Thank you so much for sharing that and helping us to shatter the stigma. Yamani, can you say a little bit about how your personal story has impacted your activism and your work with ICAH?
ICA, sure.
ICA.
Yeah. So we work to make sure that all young people are safe, affirmed, and healthy. And so we're working to make sure that happens at home, at school, and at the doctor's office. And we equally work on reducing the stigma and shame of pregnancy as we do the stigma and shame of access to abortion. We feel like young people should have the same rights as adults to decide when, whether, and how they reproduce, and who they are in general, how they pursue their lives. So I feel like that's very connected to my personal story. in many different ways. I can relate to being a young parent. I ended up having and starting my family when I was 22. So I have a 13-year-old son. But I can also relate to pursuing abortion in order to be able to finish my education without interruption. And I know what that experience is. I know what kind of responses I got, what kind of supports there were or weren't for me in either case. And so I feel very passionate about the work that I'm doing here in Illinois with and for young people.
Thank you so much, Yamani. We really appreciate you being here and sharing something that was so powerful and so important to this campaign.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't really talk about the parental notice of abortion law here, and I would like to talk about that if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure. So there are 38 states in the United States that have parental involvement laws. And so here in Illinois, what that means is that young people that are under the age of 18, so 17 and younger, have to have a parent notified within 48 hours of having an abortion. And for us, we've launched a campaign against that and actually partnered with the 1 in 3 campaign. If you go to stoppna.org, there's more information about it. But it's really a dangerous law, and I think a signal to like the pervasive norms of abortion restrictions throughout the country and how we think and feel about young people and their sexual decision making. So we've heard anecdotally from young people that, you know, instead of having parents notified, they would rather go find other ways to terminate the pregnancy, which sometimes can mean, really unsafe results for young people. We've also heard that young people have had their safety threatened, their homes threatened, meaning that they've been told they would be kicked out of the house if, in either case, if they have an abortion or if they were pregnant. And so, you know, we feel like it's a really no-win situation for a lot of young people, and we want young people to be able to make the decisions that they need to make for their own health and their own bodies by consulting a medical provider. So that's some of the work that we're doing here to try to get this law repealed. But it's going to be a long, hard road. For some reason, I think, you know, it's hard for adult women, but it's even more hard for young people.
Thank you, Yamani. You're absolutely right. Illinois isn't the only state, in fact, that has those parental notification laws. And some states, in fact, Julia, have parental consent laws as well. And so while we encourage young people, if they can, to talk with their parents, to talk with their guardians about the decision to have an abortion, it's not something that's feasible for every person. And we need to keep that in mind when these laws are enacted, definitely.
Absolutely, and I think another point that Yamani brought up was really the stigma around young people's decisions wholeheartedly, whether they decide to become parents at young ages or to have an abortion. And I think that's a really important element that ICA, Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health, has really been leading the charge around addressing young people's sexual health and the stigma that fully surrounds it. And we really appreciate Yamani bringing that to us.
And the work that she's doing, definitely. Julia, who's next?
All right, so we are joined by Elizabeth, who will be sharing her story with us. And so go ahead when you're ready, Elizabeth.
Hi, as the presenter said, my name's Elizabeth. I'm actually in Miami right now, and I'd like to share my abortion story because I believe that through story sharing, it will minimize the stigma that surrounds abortion. And when I was around 21 years old, I was in a relationship, and I became pregnant. So at this time, I really thought that I was far more educated on, sexual and reproductive health, but I found myself pregnant, and I really didn't realize that I was for a good 2 weeks. So I finally sought the help of my doctor, and he asked me, what my symptoms were, and I talked to him that it was, having pregnancy-like symptoms, and he just said that I might be pregnant, but having, he was our family doctor, and I really didn't feel comfortable getting a pregnancy test from him. He asked me if I wanted to take one, and I declined, and just went home and called a friend, and we did the pregnancy test, and it turned out that I was pregnant. So I was faced with something that I thought in the past was going to be an easy decision to make, but it wasn't. I had so many things to weigh that I had never thought about before, and it really was not an easy decision to come to. And after much thought and discussing it with my friends, my very close friends, I decided to have an abortion, and I sought a clinic online. This was before I knew about, this happened when I was in Georgia, so there are a bunch of really awesome clinics. One that I worked with, which is the Feminist Center, who provides awesome and compassionate care to women seeking abortion. And I wasn't lucky enough to have my procedure there. And when I went in, I remember how much the procedure was. It cost me $535. I was lucky enough to be able to pay for it myself, but it was quite expensive. I was told that I would receive counseling if I needed to afterwards, and the procedure itself was no longer than about 20 minutes. And when following the procedure, I was, I still don't know how to explain it to this day. I just felt a sense of loss, and perhaps it's a sense of loss of a decision, or just I don't know. I really don't know how to describe it, but I did seek the help of the counselors that were there, and nobody was really there to help me. And when I left the area where all the women came out, there, and I received more compassion from the guard at the front door. That just remember that moment of compassion, because something that stuck out to me. And again, for me, it was the most surprising thing that I thought that this was something that I knew that if I became pregnant before I decided that I was ready to have children, and I think that it's just, it was a shame to me to see the lack of compassion amongst the staff at the clinic. It was disturbing to see how much security was needed at the clinics. And from that moment, I became an ally, I became an activist for reproductive rights and justice. And, that will remain a part of me and who I am for the rest of my life.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing that story. And every person's experience is different, and we really honor you being here and sharing what yours was. I'd like now to share this piece of artwork by Saya.
This is a story Saya drew and created about her own experience.
Thank you so much, Saya, for sharing that story and really helping us in our movement and our mission today. Julia, I think that I've just about completed my shift and helping to anchor the Speakout.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parrott, for being here. It's such an honor to work with you always, and I think you really bring important messages, and I really appreciate you coming down here today.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you, Julia.
All right, thank you.